Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov. We are continuing with the Rambam, Laws of War, Sefer Shofetim, Laws of War, Hilchot Menachim U'Milchamot, Chapter 7, Halakha Tet. I'm going to review a little bit from last week. Called Elu Shechozrin, Me'ershei HaMilchama. All those who return back from war, Kesheshom'in Divrei HaKohen, when they hear the announcement of the Kohen telling them who should go back to war. Chozrin U'Mesapekin Mayim U'Mazon Anshe HaTzava. They all go back home, but they still remain part of the war effort, meaning they provide food and water for the soldiers. They also prepare the ways. They're involved in the war effort, though not actively in warfare. And those who don't go to war at all, meaning there are some who are drafted and then sent home. Then there are those who are not even drafted. And these are people that we don't bother them for any reason in the world, with nothing. They're not involved. Habone bait v'chanacho, someone who built a home and already lived in it. V'anose arusato o she'ibem, and he marries the person he betrothed to, or he does yibum, meaning he marries his brother's wife who had no children with his brother. And somebody who already used their vineyard. And yotzein ad tom shana. They don't go out for the length of a year. Because even though it's not a first marriage, let's say, it still counts as a marriage. A second marriage is different. Yibum is something else. It was common practice in the Jewish people, yeah. Except for by the Ashkenazim. How common? I don't have numbers. I mean, it's not such a common scenario. Somebody's married, they don't have children. They have a brother who's able to get married. Yeah, that all the time. All the time. That part is the most common alternative. No, people don't want to marry, so they do chalitza. I've been to one. I've seen one. Yeah. One of the most unusual things I've seen in my life. En yotzein atom shana. We don't bother them for the first year at all. Shneimar naki. You see, when the Ashkenazim stopped doing yibum, so all they did was chalitza, and chalitza involves that shoe and that whole process, so that's something very common. They don't go out for the first year. A whole year from when this begins, their timer ticks, they're exempt from anything to do with the war. Shneimar, like it says, naki yeh leveto shana echad, like the book of Devarim says, he should be clean to his home, meaning it should be only for his home. V'simach et ishto, and he should make his wife happy. Mipia Kabbalah lamdu. Based on Kabbalah, we learn Kabbalah here, meaning tradition from Moshe Rabbenu and Har Sinai. Lamdu, we learn shiye naki shana ben abayit shekana, ben isha shenasa, ben akerem shitri lechol piryo. It doesn't only refer to one's wife, but it's to the home that he bought, to the vineyard that he began to eat its fruit. All of those things are included in the 1 year that he stays home. Yud Aleph. Kol hashana kula. En mesapek mayim u'mazon. The whole first year of marriage, whole first year of living in that home, he does not bring food and water. V'lo metaken derech, and he doesn't pave the roads. V'lo shomer b'choman, he does not guard the walls of the city. V'lo noten lefasei ha'ir. Last time I mentioned to you that the one understanding of this is that he does not contribute to the wood post that blocks the gate of the city. V'lo ya'avor alav shum davar. We don't bother him with anything. Shneimar lo yitzeh batzava, v'lo ya'avor alav lechol davar. The Torah says explicitly he should not go to the military, nor does he do anything else. That's a good question. But for right now, we're saying what we're obligated to do for him. La'avor alav b'shnei lavin, lo l'tzorchei ha'ir, v'lo l'tzorchei ha'gidud. We exempt him in 2 areas. One is, yes, it seems like he's not able to do it either. Yeah, now it could be if his wife forgives him. That's really something you have to look at commentaries on. I'm not an expert here. You want to make sure that he's exempt from 2 things. One, for general need, and also for military need. He's not involved at all. Period. Now, we read all of that last week. And we spent a significant amount of time last week studying in the writings of Rabbi Yosef Misas all about the first week after the wedding. We read Shulchan Aruch together. That when a person gets married, there's the first year of marriage, there's the first week of marriage. We compared that with Avelut, also with mourning. Also, there's a week La'anenu. So here, today, we're going to discuss a few more details, and then I'll take a tangent on the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel. Right now, Rambam has a few questions. If a person buys a new home, and he doesn't live in it, the reason he doesn't live in it is because he bought it as an investment property to rent out to other people. Is he exempt from going to war? Meaning, in which category is he? Is he still in the category of the person who bought a new house and didn't yet live in it? Is he a person who bought a new house and is living in it because he's renting it to someone who's living in it and he's already receiving benefit from it? What is the halachic status of such a person? Here, Rabbenu Rambam says, Bana bait. Let's say a person builds a home. V'hiskiro la'acherim. And he rents it out to other people. V'hikdim lo secharo. And this person prepays his rent. What do you mean prepays his rent? Yeah, so here's a year up front. Is that a good business practice? It gives you, the renter, not so much leverage over the landlord. It gives the landlord leverage over the renter. And in a world in which landlords may feel that renters, we've spoken about this here before, can abuse them as landlords, then sometimes they might request such a thing. But in Israel, it's common practice. They ask for you to give them 12 checks upfront, post-dated for the next year. And the dating on checks is something interesting. Not every bank really cares what date is written on the check. Technically, someone could go in at least for a few months at a time and put in all your checks. And you're trusting them not to take out money before the day of the month they're supposed to take money out of. Sometimes there are landlords, even here in San Diego. I heard people ask for 1 year upfront, plus security deposits, plus only to get into the house. If you're talking about a house in our neighborhood, for those of you in Texas, forgive me. Let's say in this neighborhood right now, if you wanted to rent a house, average would be somewhere in the ballpark of $6,000 or $7,000. That's the ballpark of a month. So now, if someone asks for you for 12 months upfront, how much money do you have to have in cash to give a person? It's not post-dated checks. This is they want the first year of rent upfront, plus perhaps another month security deposit. So it's 13 times 6,000. You have to come up with a tremendous amount of money. That used to be a down payment on a house. That used to be where you put down so you could pay the rest of your. This is a tremendous amount of money. But let's say such a thing happens, meaning this person built a house and right away he rents it out for the next year. This is considered like a person who's already lived in the house. So when does his timer start ticking? When he gets the payment, that's what starts his 12-month timer that he doesn't go to war. You can't say, I didn't live in my house yet. No. You got the money, fine. Natano secharo lachar 12 chodesh. If he only pays him at the end of 12 months, harehu kemi shelo chanacho ad ata. Then it's considered like a person who only now dedicated. Thank you, Tom. Only now dedicated. The book you could borrow because that's mine. Only now he dedicated. I forgot my source sheet at home. Only now he dedicated the house, and therefore, what? The timer starts then. But what's the difference to someone who lived in a house or didn't live in the house? Not like that. What's the difference in the first one and the second one? Practically. Practically.
Well, practically, if you're living out, you're not building a house to live in.
But it's still your house, meaning you're still exempt from war. There's two categories of people who are exempt from war. What are they?
Well, one that planted a vineyard, and the other one is.
No, those are three types of people. I'm talking about two categories. Those who we started the.
Those who the Kohen told to stop, and those who were never drafted.
Thank you, Hanan. Those who are drafted and the Kohen sends home, and those who are not even drafted. That's the difference. When a person wants to determine which category am I in, I built a new house, but I haven't lived in it yet. The question is, did you get your money? If you have received your money, then you are now in the category of someone who has lived in the house. If you did not get your money, we're talking about paying 12 months of rent up front. That's what we're talking about. That's what Rambam says. And so if you did not get your money, then you are considered a person who built a house, but did not yet live in it. All that changes practically is, are you involved in the war effort or not? Both of them don't go to war. Now, the same thing is true with, let's say you build a home and you've decided not yet to move into the home, but yes to move all of your property into the home. Let me give you an example. When I first rented this house that I'm living in now, Hanan was a baby, a few months old. It wasn't my choice to change locations of where I lived. And it happened to be that I moved into that house the day before I flew to Israel for a month. That's how it was. And so I remember with a moving truck, we moved everything to the house. We left everything in boxes. We packed in the old house our suitcases for Israel, and we flew to Israel. By the way, I can only do that with a wife like mine. People say, how do you travel the whole world, your whole family? It's not, nothing to do with me. Traveling is the easy part. Traveling with the family is only because of my wife. Baruch Hashem. So we came back from Israel, straight into a house that was boxes. You have to do laundry, you have to get new clothes, nothing. Everything is in boxes. So when did I really take possession of that house? Now, obviously, I started paying rent before I flew to Israel. But was that house really mine in a halachic sense or not in terms of going to war? All my stuff is there, but I'm not there. So this is what the Rambam says. Now, you sometimes ask yourself a question, like, why do these laws matter? All laws matter because when telling people things, as lawmakers, people are going to try to get around laws. Can you imagine how many people might start this, war is breaking out next month, let's invest in real estate. All kinds of questions that are going to come up. Even people not tricking the system, but you have to have clarity. Any law which is vague causes problems. I now have to take a whole refresher course in law. And what happens? All of the laws that are vague mean you can get in trouble. Because you might understand the law one way, but a judge might understand the law a different way. What do you do then? Well, then you're at the mercy of the court. But really, it's not fair. Sometimes people get upset. Halakha requires when you make a tea bag on Shabbat, you first put the hot water in one cup, and a second cup, and a third cup. You put the tea bag first, the tea bag second, and all of that. But we're talking about charging people with a capital crime. Cooking on Shabbat is a capital offense. If we're going to charge someone with a capital offense, we better make it abundantly clear to them what they are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. In the days of COVID, I realized very quickly that all the people who make fun of halakha, they had no right to talk anymore. I think everybody at that time was privy to the fact that American law made no sense. That some things apply here, but not there. Remember in Israel, there were laws. You could play soccer together in a group up to 10 people, but one of them cannot be a referee. What is it? Were there statistics that were 10 people with a referee has more chance of COVID than 10 people without a referee? Who decided? 5 people walking here, 3 people over there. Arbitrary laws. And then they create problems. I remember walking here on the beach. We were walking along the beach. It was at nighttime during COVID. And the sidewalk and the sand are owned one by the state and one by the city. And the city of San Diego and the state of California had two different laws for COVID. So you couldn't walk, I think that you couldn't walk on the sidewalk because that was city property, but you could walk on the sand. You have to understand, here's the sand, here's the sidewalk. So the San Diego Police Department was out in full force, standing on the sidewalks, asking people very kindly to please move onto the sand. Why? Because on the sand, there was no COVID. But on the sidewalk, there was. Now, why am I picking on something that doesn't matter? At the end of the day, both are behind us. What matters is that any legal system which doesn't make sense, the first thing that's going to happen, people will disregard it entirely. It's the premise for our rabbis tell us that en gozrin gezerah latzibur, she'en hatzibur yachol la'amod ba. We don't make rules for the people that the people can't follow. Because if the people can't follow the rule that you're making, then what you're asking for is lawlessness. Because ultimately nobody will follow the rules. And when they don't follow the rules that they cannot follow, they also will stop following the rules that they can follow. Like you're a parent at home. You have to know how to pick your battles. If you fight all the battles, you will lose the war. Every general knows this. You have to strategically lose battles. That's the only way you win a war. It's not a soccer game, a baseball game, basketball game. Nobody's keeping score. So you have to determine what does it mean to win the war. What it means is I might have to give up on that part of my country. I might have to give up on that group of soldiers. I might have to. Unfortunately, those are decisions you make in war. But everyone knows it's part of how you win a war. It's strategy. It's not about keeping score. How many enemies die doesn't determine how many days you've been at war, how many rockets you've. Nobody's counting those things. And so when it comes to law, it's the same thing. I told you once a story that I used to work in a yeshiva. One of the most exciting things for American kids who go to Israel for yeshiva, seminary, the year after, the gap year, after high school, before college, is they realize that at the age of 18, you can drink in Israel without your parents' supervision. So in the US, they have to wait till they're 21, which, by the way, is a fantastic law because at 18, you can go to war in this country. I mean, you could die in a bomb in the roadside in Afghanistan. You probably still can't vote for the person who sends you there. You can't open up a bottle of beer once you come back here. Some places you might not have, for sure, other laws you can't do till you turn 21. I heard once a veteran talk about that. He said, I want to go back. I want to go back to Iraq. I said, why? You just got back from Iraq. Why would you go back? He said, because over there I'm a man. And over here I'm a child. And by the way, just for the record, everyone who talks about we don't send children to war or children to war, but this country clearly sends children to war. If someone can't open up a bottle of alcohol because you think they're too young for that, then why do you consider them old enough? But I'm ready, I look at the generation around me, I'm ready to say that the average age of adulthood might be 79. I don't know, it's where society's at right now. Looking at 45-year-old people with $180,000 salaries living in their mom's basement playing video games at night. That's where the reality that we live in today is that. And so, I don't know, are you really an adult just because you make money, just because you drive a car? So something we have to redefine. There are some countries where a 14-year-old is probably more mature than 22-year-olds. I'm not hating on any age group. I'm simply saying from my observations in the world. I once got in a United flight, back when United was still Continental Airlines. I was in yeshiva. I was 14 years old. I come to check in, and she started berating me. Who are your parents? They let you fly alone? I was like 14 and a half. My son is a year older than you. I would never let him get an airplane alone. Now listen, her job is just to check me into my flight, not to give me advice on my life. But that was her whole statement. On the tip of my tongue, does your son do his own laundry? Does he cook his own food? I've been living out of the house now at this point for a year and a half. Well, you're busy giving me a speech. Of course, your son is going to be 20 and he still doesn't do his own laundry. So I'm okay flying alone. I respect the fact that your son is not. To each of their own. How did I get here? 987. How did I get here? When you move. How did I get to this whole conversation? There was a point of it.
How you don't get into war.
You have to you must clarify laws. You cannot leave laws vague. I was telling you when I was in yeshiva. So the students, they realize when they come to Israel, it's party time. The parents are not there. There's alcohol galore, bars that let them in, boys, girls, that fun. It's fun. I'm not talking about everybody. I know that people get so nervous. I'm not talking about your kids, of course not. I'm not. Of course not. Jacob, you spent some time in Israel. It's nobody's kids. There's ghosts that show up there, and you ask yourself, what's the deal with these children? They're there, they're partying. What should you do? How do schools control them? In the yeshiva that I worked in, the rabbi had a rule. Every yeshiva has a rule: no drinking alcohol. Every one of them. Clearly, nobody listens. So his rule was, you are allowed to drink. 2 rules. You can't get drunk. You can't be in a bar. If you're going to a steakhouse with your friends and drinking wine, mabruk, do what you want. You're going with your buddies to a burger place and getting some beer, fine. I don't want to see you in a bar. I don't want to see you come back here drunk. Meaning, if you're going to drink, learn how to drink responsibly. By the way, I was at a restaurant recently, and the owner was telling me about getting a liquor license in San Diego versus just a beer and wine license. It's much easier to get a beer and wine license than a liquor license, aside from the politics, I'm sure. Beer and wine accompanied by food are still considered respectable in society. People going and getting drunk, and then people aren't walking out of their steakhouse with a bottle of wine and a brown bag, hiccuping in the road. It's not as common as you might find in other places, and therefore the police department is much more calm at handing out those licenses than they are other ones. This is something that this Rosh Yeshiva recognized. His whole attitude was, if we tell them not to drink, they're going to drink. And then they're going to be breaking the rules anyways. And they know that they're breaking the rules, which means they will not keep any of the other rules in the yeshiva. Better to create rules they can follow and that we can enforce than rules that they won't follow and that we can enforce. And I always thought it was a lot of wisdom there. Don't make rules you cannot enforce. And make sure that when you make rules, you're very, very, very clear. Clarity, consistency. That's why halakha sometimes gets so nitpicky on details, not out of a desire to be annoying, but because if you don't do that, you create so many other problems. So in halakha yud bet, yud gimel. Bana bait. Let's say you build a house. V'natan bo chavatzav, and you put your stuff inside of it. V'na'al alehem, and you lock the door. Im hayat tzarich lebatel al shamiratam. If you otherwise would have to take off from work to protect your stuff, meaning if you didn't have a house, and this is the kind of property that is worth enough that you would stay there watching it. Think about packages that get delivered to your front door. There are some packages you don't mind if they sit outside for the day. There's some other packages, I don't know, think you ordered your new MacBook. You don't want it sitting in your driveway for the next 8 hours till you get home from work. So you call a friend, you call a family member, you tell your wife or husband, come into the door, take it inside. What kind of property is it? If it's the kind of property that you would otherwise have to watch if you did not have a home to put it in, then this house is considered used already because you're using it to protect your things. And if it's the kind of property that you don't have to sit there watching it, it's like a person who bought the house but didn't yet use it, didn't live it, even though you're using it to hold your property. I'm thinking an example. I'm not sure that I'm right. Maybe I'll still be upset afterwards. But for right now, here's what I'm thinking. Aside from your home, tell me what the most expensive property you own is. Where do you park your car? Outside. No? It's interesting. Your computer is worth more or less? Less than the car, unless you have a MacBook. Yeah. Then what? Very good. Your car should be inside and your laptop in the driveway, you know? It's easier to take the laptop. So notice, it's not just value, it's also I'm going to create a word, I hope it's a real world, so the stealability of something. Yes, I'm sure there's a better word. There are certain things that you need the property to protect that item. And there are other things that, no, you don't need it. If I park my car in the driveway of that house, I'm not using that house yet because I don't need the house to protect the car. Right? If your car is not registered and you didn't pay, then okay, maybe you do need the house because that's private property. But this is the kind of thing that a posek will need to figure out in a relevant situation. Yes? Very interesting to me. It's almost Tisha B'Av. I shared once about Tisha B'Av. I'll be a Geulah soon. We don't have to worry. This idea of your car being worth something. I once was with a Rosh Yeshiva who asked a group of students, tell me, how long would you need to know somebody before you felt comfortable giving them the keys to drive your car? Depends on the person. Depends on the car. Yeah? Depends on the owner. Everyone gave different answers. Well, if I knew them a long time, if I had a picture of their driver license, if I knew they had insurance, everyone had 2 years. Somebody said never. Everyone had different answers. Then he said, would you at least have to know what about them? At least to know their name, at least have a picture of their ID, at least. He said, so why when you go out at night and you bring someone home, do you not at least require the same level of knowledge of that person as you do when you give them the keys to your car? Why take a girl or a guy back from a bar? You don't even know their name. You for sure don't know their full name and their address and if they have insurance. You for sure don't know them for 6 months or a year or 2 years.
But my friend's grandmother, when she met her husband and now their husband, when they met for the first time, she went to her house. So the grandmother, she got his social security and his ID and scanned it.
I love Sephardic parenting. That's my favorite part of it all. That's the best.
Got his social security, his ID, and she scanned it in her printer in her room, not her granddaughter's room. She goes, here's your belongings because you do need your driver's license to drive my granddaughter. And if someone kills my daughter, I know you did.
That's more liberal parenting than me. You see, I'm gonna do full background checks on them with a. So over here, you have a reality where people treat certain parts of their property better than they treat themselves, which, by the way, is part of the destruction of a society. When HaRambam tell us there are 3 reasons why the Beit HaMikdash are destroyed, all of them have to do with the lack of belief in people. They say because of avodah zarah, gilui arayot, shifichut damim, idol worship, foreign worship, adultery, forbidden sexual relationships, and murder. See, I don't believe that people are divine creatures. I don't believe they're created in the image of the divine. Then for sure I don't care enough about them. Imagine myself. If I don't consider myself a divine being, then of course I don't care who I sleep with, because I'm just another animal from the Discovery Channel. And if that's the case, then for sure, if I don't care about my life, I don't care about your life. Clearly not, because we're dealing with a society where that is rampant. That people don't even ask if they have diseases, which diseases they have. That's where we're at. And this is not a hatred on society. It's an understanding that people have been raised not to value themselves. And so how can a Beit HaMikdash be destroyed? If I don't believe in the divinity of myself, I don't believe in taking care of myself, I can do the unthinkable to other people. In a society like that, so how can God say, V'shachanti betocham, and I'm going to dwell among them? How can I dwell in a place where there's no room for anything holy and pure and good? Rabbenu Rambam continues, V'chol habone bait, anyone who builds a home, a house, or notea kerem, or plants a vineyard, b'chutz ha'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, eino chozer alehem. He doesn't come back from war because of it. What is he telling you, the Rambam? Know that outside of Israel, it's not the same thing. The Lechem Mishneh says the following. You might think that when it says anyone who builds a home is exempt. No. Anyone who builds a home who has a mitzvah to build that home. But outside of Israel, you don't have a mitzvah to build a home. And therefore, you're not exempt from war because of that mitzvah. The same with the vineyard. In the land of Israel, you have a mitzvah to plant a vineyard. Outside of Israel, you don't. And therefore, you're only exempt from the mitzvah of war if the thing that you did is a mitzvah, but if it's not a mitzvah, you can't possibly be exempt from that. I think that that's a proper time to bring up the conversation of living in Israel versus living outside of Israel and what the halachot. Forget right now what you're practically going to do tomorrow. I'm clearly a rabbi sitting in San Diego, California, having this conversation. So if anyone feels judged, I'm judging myself primarily. So, but in terms of living in Eretz Israel or not, I sent out a source sheet as a PDF. It's called Mitzvat Yishuv Haaretz. I made this mamash in the last few minutes before I sent out the email today. So it's not an exhaustive. Something my source sheets are like 40 pages. It's not a 40-page source sheet. It's just 3 pages with some quotes. If you're in the Google Classroom, it's attached as a PDF. If you're not in the Google Classroom, you could send it to somebody. If you have a phone, please send it. You're going to want this source sheet in front of you. Yeah. My dentist couldn't believe it. He said he thought everybody would be flying out. I said the flights in were standing room only. I'm going to tell you this, what I've said since the beginning of the war. Am Yisrael is an incredible nation. World class. You see what happens, you see what's going on. It's the best of the best. I'm not afraid to tell you that. If only our leadership was worthy of the greatness of our people. I'm going to, as many times as I can say that. Our people are incredible. And there are certain people that they profit and they thrive from pitting one against another, against even in the middle of a war, But Am Yisrael don't have any second thoughts about Am Yisrael. People who are willing to leave their jobs and their homes, their families, to get on a plane, to go fight and not know if they're going to come back because they care about you and I more than about themselves. They don't make people like that anymore. They don't exist. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect our Chayalim every day. Every day, it's new soldiers, new people, new names, new. How can you live like that? So, Mitzvat Yishuv Haaretz. Yishuv means to live in, to settle, not in a negative connotation that is settling. And Haaretz is the land. The Torah says the following: והורשתם את הארץ וישבתם בה, כי לכם נתתי את הארץ לרשת אותה. Says the Torah, you shall conquer the land, and you shall live in it, because I gave you this land in order to conquer it. Says Rashi, והורשתם את הארץ, והורשתם אותם יושביה. You first have to conquer it from its inhabitants. ואז וישבתם בה, and only afterwards can you live in it. Why? ואז וישבתם בה, תוכלו להתקיים בה, ואם לאו, לא תוכלו להתקיים בה. If you don't first conquer the land of Israel, you will never be able to live in it. It will never work for you. Look in source 5, Sfono, Rabbi Yonatan Halevy. כאשר תבערו יושבי הארץ, only when you remove the inhabitants of this land, תזכו להוריש את הארץ לבניכם, will you merit to inherit the land to your children. שאם לא תבערו אותם, because if you do not get rid of them, אף על פי שאתם תכבשו את הארץ, even though you physically conquer the land, it won't matter. Why? לא תזכו להוריש לבניכם. You certainly will not be able to give it to your children. If your whole existence in Eretz Yisrael is going to be an experience of, I conquered a land and I left my enemies to live with me, then you will never have peace, ever. Here, Rabbenu HaRambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman says, in source 3, Al da'ati zo, מצוות עשה היא, יצווה אותם שישבו בארץ וירשו אותה, כי הוא נתנה להם. There's a mitzvah to go and settle the land of Israel because he gave it to the Jewish people. ולא ימאסו בנחלת אדוני, and they should not hate or be disgusted by the inheritance of God. ולא יעלה על דעתם ללכת ולכבוש ארץ שינה, או ארץ אשור וזולתן ולהתיישב שם, יעברו על מצוות אדוני. And a person who thinks, let me go conquer other countries, let me go occupy other countries, that's where I'm going to live. That's an avera against the will of God. Jewish people belong in the land of the Jews. Now this is very important. Rabbenu HaRambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, is of the opinion that conquering the land of Israel applies also now. Also when the Jews are in exile, meaning before there was a state of Israel. Look in source 6. Mitzvah revi'it, the fourth mitzvah, shnitztavenu, that we were commanded, lareshet haaretz, to conquer the land of Israel. Asher natan ha'el yitbarach v'yitalel avotenu, that the God has given to our forefathers, la'Avraham, Yitzchak, u'Yaakov. V'lo nazva, biyad zulatenu min ha'omot u'lishmama, and we're not allowed to leave the land of Israel to other nations to occupy it or even just to be desolate. It's forbidden on the Jewish people to let Eretz Israel be owned by anybody other than Jews. This mitzvah applies. Hi mitzvah taseh ledorot. And look at the last. This is a mitzvah that is eternal. Mitchayev kol yachid mimenu. Every individual Jew has an obligation. Vafilu bizman galut kayadua batalmud b'mkomot harbeh. Even when the Jews are in exile, there is a mitzvah to actively conquer the land of Israel and to make sure that it is owned by Jewish people. You cannot leave it in the hands of other people, and you cannot leave it desolate. This is an unbelievable mitzvah here. It's a mitzvah that is eternal. It's not limited to where we live, when we live, are we strong, are we in exile, and who? Not on the nation, on every individual. You can buy some land in Israel and free it. That's your mitzvah. Now here, you must remember that the Ramban is saying something quite dangerous. At this point in time, Jews don't own the land of Israel. But he's telling you there's a mitzvah to free the land of Israel. So when people start to tell you, I don't know, should we live in Israel, not live in Israel, maybe live in Israel, what are you going to do with one of the 613 mitzvot? Now famously, Rabbenu HaRambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, when he enumerates the 613 mitzvot, he doesn't mention the mitzvah of conquering the land of Israel, nor of living in Eretz Israel. Rambam doesn't have such a mitzvah. So here you have an argument between the Ramban and the Rambam, whether or not you have a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel. Now there was a Chacham, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Leon, and he wrote a book called Megillat Esther, nothing to do with Purim, so don't get stuck on that. The book Megillat Esther was intended to protect the Rambam from the attacks of the Ramban when he was counting the mitzvot. And here he says, Nireh li, it appears to me, ki ma shelo mena'a harav, that which the Rambam did not count this as one of the 630 mitzvot. Hu lefi shemitzvat Yerushat haaretz v'shivata lo nahaga, rak bimei Moshe v'Yehoshua v'David, v'chol zeman shlo galu me'artzam. It only applied the mitzvah to live in Israel when we were not in exile, in the days of Moshe and Yehoshua and David. But once the Jews were exiled from their land, this mitzvah no longer applies to live in Israel until the Mashiach comes.
Is that where some of the anti-Zionists think
And he mentions the famous Gemara in Ketubot that it's forbidden for us to go and conquer the land until the redemption is ready to come. And he says, and therefore, l'chach ne'emar, that's why it says, שבוודאי מצווה זו אינה נוהגת אחר חורבן הבית שיבנה בימים אמן. The temple should be rebuilt soon, but it's not a mitzvah so long as the temple has not been rebuilt. You're going to have a serious difference in opinions. So do we have a mitzvah to go to Israel or not? Do we have a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel or not? Maybe we're not even allowed to conquer Israel. Maybe those crazy Hasidim with the Palestinian flags are right. Maybe. Absolutely not. For sure not. With all due respect to Megillat Esther, is a sole opinion. Our Chachamim never understood the Rambam like that. You know, Shulchan Aruch has no mitzvah to believe in God. It's not written anywhere in Shulchan Aruch you have to believe in God. Keep Shabbat, yes. Eat kosher, yes. Believe in God, no. Why not?
Because that's the most everybody knows.
Meaning, why would you keep Shabbat if you don't believe in God? The Rambam has so many mitzvot. You can only do them in Israel. Why would the Rambam have to tell you it's also a mitzvah to go live in Israel? This is the simplest answer for why the Rambam doesn't count it as a separate mitzvah. In fact, the question is on the Ramban. Ramban, why do you count it as a separate mitzvah? Because without it, you still would have to live in Israel. All of the other mitzvot you have to fulfill, you have to do them in Israel. You can't do them in Canada. So what are you going to do? Rabbi Yisrael of Shikalov was a student of the Gaon of Vilna. It's one of the students who made Aliyah to Israel. In the early years, when the Gaon of Vilna pushed his students to make Aliyah, he entirely disagrees with the Megillat Esther. He has a different understanding of why the Rambam didn't count. It has to do with whether or not the obligation is. What does that mean? He understands the Rambam only believes that living in the land of Israel, conquering it is a rabbinic obligation, not a biblical obligation. I don't need to understand the Rambam this way. I just brought it as another source. And it's important to know because the students of the Gaon of Vilna made Aliyah to Israel. And this particular book, the Pe'at HaShulchan, a lot of the book talks about how difficult it was a few hundred years ago for Jews to live in Israel. Life wasn't so simple there. And nonetheless, he still wants to justify, so why are they doing it? Especially if the Rambam doesn't count it as one of the mitzvot. I usually don't jump this fast to later rabbis, but Chacham Ovadia does a good job usually of summarizing things for us. In source 9, Chacham Ovadia Yosef writes, HaRambam בספר המצוות מנה מצוות יישוב ארץ ישראל למצוות עשה מן התורה. The Ramban counts living in the land of Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot. והסכים עמו הרשב"ץ בתשובה, הרשב"ץ agrees. ואומנם הגאון רבי יצחק דיליון בספרו מגילת אסתר, page 2 on the top right, כתב שהרמב"ם חולק וסובר שמצוות יישוב ארץ ישראל נוהגת לאחר גלות ישראל מעל אדמתם. The Ramban, the Rabbi Yitzchak Leon says, the Ramban and the Rambam disagree. There's no mitzvah to live in the land of Israel according to the Rambam after the destruction of the temple. ואין זו מצווה הנוהגת לדורות. It's not a mitzvah that applies for eternity. אולם דבריו תמוהים. Says Chacham Yosef, his words are very puzzling. He doesn't want to say they're wrong. He says they're very puzzling. וכבר עמדו האחרונים על דברי מגילת אסתר הנ"ל. Already many rabbis stood up against what the Rabbi Megillat Esther wrote. ודחו דבריו בשתי ידיים, and they push away his words with both of their hands. רבי דברי האחידה, בחיים יוסף דוד אזולאי, writes in his book, יאיר רוזן, דברי הגאון רבי חיים פלאג'י, נשמת כל חיים, שו"ת נווה שלום, שו"ת אבני נזר, שו"ת חבנים בנעימים, שו"ת דבר יהושע, ועוד many חכמים, all disagree with Rabbi Yitzchak Leon's interpretation of the Rambam, and definitely they understand that there is a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel even nowadays. So what does the Talmud say? What do our rabbis think? Our rabbis, especially since the Talmud was written, much of it after the destruction. So look at source 10. The Mishnah says, Hakol ma'alin le'eretz Yisrael ve'en hakol motzi'in. Anyone can force their family to go to Israel, but they cannot remove other people from Israel. So you can't force your family to leave Israel, but you can force your family in Korah Halakha to move to Israel. Hakol ma'alin Yerushalayim ve'en hakol motzi'in. You could force your family to move from Haifa, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but not the other way around. Listen, ultimately, I will live in Israel wherever I can get our Kehillat to be. But if you were to ask me, in my dream of dreams, in my heart of hearts, where would I live? Only in Yerushalayim. Only in Yerushalayim. Why? Why Yerushalayim? Because if Eretz Yisrael is the greatest of all of the lands, then Yerushalayim is the greatest of all of the cities. And it is the greatest of all the cities and the greatest of all the lands. And if I could, and Baruch Hashem, we're lucky. Yeah, you say real estate in Yerushalayim goes up and up and up and up and up. It's true. Real estate in Yerushalayim also expands. Yerushalayim of 100 years ago is not Yerushalayim today. Yerushalayim today is huge. Absolutely. Like you can expand the borders of Israel. Absolutely. And by the way, you see this in laws of Purim. So where do they celebrate Purim? on the second day, like in Jerusalem, and not on the first day. That border keeps changing. As Jerusalem grows, it keeps changing. So, echad hanashim v'echad hanashim. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, meaning either spouse can force the other one into aliyah. In my original ketubah, now my parents flew to New York to marry me. In my ketubah, it said, one of the conditions we write in the Jerusalem ketubot is, V'lo yitzeh me'eretz Yisrael kim birshuta hatov v'hagamur. That I will not leave Israel without my wife's explicit permission that's full of consent. I mean, her consensual permission. It has to be not just permission. I really mean it. When our parents came to New York and he saw the Hasidim there and he realized that the wedding was going to have in it Hasidim, and he was afraid that to use an Israeli ketubah in New York, they'd make problems. And he said, listen, already you're barely getting married, so might as well. I had to write a whole new ketubah. I said, okay, let's say we write this ketubah. That's what I wanted. But practically, what does it mean? I live in San Diego. So what it means is that when you guys visit Israel next time, you can't take the flight back home unless your wife lets. And that's what it means. Meaning you are, every time you go in and out of Israel, you have to ask her permission. Maybe it's good I didn't, because every time my wife, if she could, she would hold me back. So, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Hu omer la'alot, v'hi omeret shelo la'alot. If he says to go to Israel, and she says she doesn't want to go, kofin otah la'alot. We force her to go. V'im lav tetzeh belo ketubah. And if she says, I don't want to go anyways, she leaves, and she forfeits all of her ketubah. He doesn't pay her a penny. She leaves her in the dust and goes to Israel. He omeret la'alot, v'hu omer shelo la'alot. She wants to go and he doesn't want to go. Kofin oto la'alot. We force him to go. V'im lav, and if we can't force him, yotzi, he has to divorce her. V'iten ketubah, and he has to pay up the ketubah. So it's always in favor, the law is always in favor of whoever is going to move to Israel. Chachamim continue. He omer that's it. V'hu omer shelo letzet. She wants to leave, and he says not to leave. Kofin ota shelo letzet. We force her not to leave Israel. V'im lav, and if she doesn't listen, that's it. Below ketubah. She can leave, but without her ketubah. Who? Yeah. Unless he leaves. Oh, so now we're not talking about the reasons why to live outside of Eretz Yisrael. The assumption is that she prefers to stay in Israel even without a good parnasah than to go out for it. Yeah, so it still wouldn't matter. Technically, that's the reason why they're getting divorced. Hu omer latzet. He wants to leave. He omer shelo latzet. She doesn't want to go. Kofin oto shelo latzet. We force him not to go. V'im lav yotzi v'iten ketubah. He can go, but he has to pay up the ketubah. The whole amount. So here you see that the power is in the hands of whoever wants to stay in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know of any other halakha like this. It's very important to our rabbis that Jewish people live in Eretz Yisrael and they do not leave. And that the law always favors the person who wants to stay. Maran, in the Shulchan Aruch, Even HaEzer, Laws of Ketubot, source 12, he rules halakha that way. Exactly what the Gemara says, he rules it a halakha. Here enters source 13. Source 13 is where everything kind of gets wild. Tosafot. Now, those of you who've been reading the books that we've been recommending in the community for the last couple of years, you probably have got your fair share of why the rabbis of Spain think differently than the rabbis of France and Germany, and some of the fundamental principles that lie behind that. You're going to appreciate this even more. But let's read Tosafot in the same place in the Talmud and see what the French-German commentary in the Talmud says. We're going to intentionally misread it the first time. So don't cut this video and tell me that I'm misreading it on purpose. We're going to analyze a contemporary Ashkenazi understanding of this Tosafot and then come back and fix it. So, do with me? Tosafot says the following. Now, who wrote Tosafot? Who wrote the Rambam? The Rambam. Who wrote Rashi? Who wrote Tosafot? Many.
Both were many different Chachamim.
Tosafot is a collection of French and German rabbis. Tosafot literally means additions. So all kinds of different rabbis writing commentaries under the same umbrella of the camp of the Tosafot. History of the Tosafos, if you want, on your own time. For right now, Tosafot. Ashkenazim famously call them the Tosfos. Yeah, so there's no sa, it's tos. They would say Tosfot, and that's how the Israelis say it too, but we don't say it like that. It's classic us to tell people how to pronounce their names properly. Haya Omer Rabbenu Chaim. Rabbenu Chaim, who is clearly one of the Baalei Tosafot, meaning he's one of the rabbis of the Tosafot. He used to say, De'achshav, that nowadays, Eno mitzvah ladur be'eretz Yisrael. I'm intentionally misreading the sentence. Don't jump on me. It is not a mitzvah. You have to read this like an Ashkenazi. Eno mitzvah. Yeah, it's important for me to read it to you like that. I'll explain why in a few minutes. It's not a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Ki yesh kama mitzvot atiluyot ba'aretz. Because there are a number of mitzvot that you must fulfill once you come to Israel. V'chama onashin de'en anu yocholim lizaher behem ve'la'amod alehem. There are so many mitzvot and so many consequences for not fulfilling these mitzvot that are connected to the land of Israel. If you are right now sitting in San Diego and there's no kosher meat, and there's no kosher fish, and there's no kosher wine, and there's no kosher cheese, and you go into Sprouts, tell me what you can for sure buy that's kosher. Vegetables and fruits. Not in Israel. All of the fruits and vegetables in Israel are not kosher until you make them kosher. You have to take off masrot, trumot. You know how to take off trumot or masrot from? You have to take off a piece and consecrate it on a coin and dedicate when the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. So that cucumber that you got at the store, all of a sudden, it's complicated. You don't know how to do it. You're planting fruits in your backyard. The lemon, you want to pick it from the tree. Can you pick it from the tree? When can you pick it from the tree? What if it's the wrong year to pick fruits from the tree? There are all kinds of mitzvot that happen in Eretz Yisrael. Taking off challah from your dough in Israel is a biblical law. Not a rabbinic law like in, it's a custom almost in America. An important one, but not the same as Eretz Yisrael. Halachot change. So says Rabbenu Chaim, you're not commanded to live in Israel. Why? There's no mitzvah there, because it's too hard. It's too hard. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Alev Shalom, he runs with this. Let's see just how far. Source 14. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, born in Europe, becomes a rabbi in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Probably the most prominent Ashkenazi posek of the United States in the last 100 years. Were there others? Yes. Most prominent? Yes. Let's read. Udvar she'elatcha, and based on your question, אם יש מצווה עכשיו לדור בארץ ישראל כהרמב"ן או כהרבנו חיים, דאינה מצווה בזמן הזה. You're asking me whether the halacha is like the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, that you have to go and conquer the land of Israel, or like Rabbenu Chaim, the Tosafot, who says, look what he writes, דאינה מצווה בזמן הזה, that it's not a mitzvah nowadays. הנה רוב הפוסקים, most of the poskim, Savrei dehu mitzvah, are of the opinion that it is a mitzvah. אבל פשוט שאין זה בזמן הזה מצווה חיובית על הגוף. But this is obviously not a mitzvah that is obligatory on your person. You guys ready for some Ashkenazi logic now? Dimken, because if you had an obligation to live in Israel, it would come out that it's forbidden for Jews to live outside of Israel. Because you're violating a biblical mitzvah. Like a person who's going to wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzit. Because you're not allowed to wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzit. ולא הוזכר איסור אלא על הדר בארץ ישראל שאסור לצאת על מנת לשכון בחוץ לארץ. The only prohibition is not on Jews living in America. It's a prohibition of leaving Israel to come to America. וגם כן, הוודאי אינו איסור לאו. And of course, it's not actually a prohibition from the Torah to leave Eretz Yisrael. Of course. משמע דרק ליושבי ארץ ישראל יש איסור שאסור חרמים. And to leave Israel only applies, the prohibition of leaving Israel is only rabbinic, and it only applies to who? To those who live in Israel. But from the side of the mitzvah, like, do I have a mitzvah to live in Israel? And there is no such mitzvah. Only when you live there you fulfill a mitzvah. And because it's not a positive, active mitzvah, יש ודאי להתחשב בחשש של רבנו חיים בתוספות, אם יוכל להיזהר במצוות התלויות בארץ. So for sure you can take Rabbenu Chaim's opinion into consideration about why there are good reasons not to live in Israel.
But can I see how?
It's like using double things.
You're not the only one who felt that way. If you look on source 15, and I'll go back and read the Tosafot correctly in just a minute. Chacham Ovadia Yosef writes the following, and Yadbi Omer, V'anochi haro'eh, and I see, l'hagaon hamefusam, to the famous genius, Moreinu Harav Moshe Feinstein, Beshut Igrot Moshe Shekatav. He wrote, She'en kan aseh chiyuvit, there's no positive biblical obligation. Ela she'im dar be'eretz Yisrael mekayem mitzvah, that only if you live in Israel you get a mitzvah, but there is no mitzvah to go to Israel. V'tamhani, and I'm bewildered. Sharei Mishnah shelema shaninu, because we have a whole Mishnah that says, Hakol ma'alin le'eretz Yisrael, ven hakol motzin. You can force anyone to move to Israel, and you cannot force them to leave. שכשהאישה אומרת לעלות לארץ ישראל והבעל מסרב, כופין אותו להוציא ותן כתובה, we have all those halachot of forcing one to go to Eretz Yisrael. If it was not a mitzvah, it's a Mishnah. It's like a very simple statement of the Mishnah. ואם אין מצווה חיובית לעלות לארץ ישראל, מהי כולי היי? And if there is no mitzvah to go to Eretz Yisrael, so what's all the tumult about forcing people to go to Israel? אלא ודאי דלתא. וחוב גמור על כל מי שחרד לדבר אדוני ומצוותיו לעלות לארץ ישראל. And therefore, anybody who has any kind of desire to fulfill the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu properly has a mitzvah to move to Israel. ובפרט בזמן הזה, especially nowadays. מפשט דברי הרמב"ם, and this obviously from the words of the Rambam. By the way, the one who says there is no mitzvah to live in Israel, the Rambam writes the following, לעולם ידור בארץ ישראל. A person should always prefer to live in Israel. He cut out the most of the sentence. The Rabbenu HaRambam says you should always prefer to live in Israel. He's based on Talmud and Ketubot. Even in a city which is majority non-Jewish, than to live outside of Israel in a city which is majority Jewish. Go live with idol worshippers in Eretz Israel, and don't live outside of Israel in Brooklyn. See, we're in San Diego. We don't even hit the category of Jewish. Over there, it's something else. מוכח שעל כל פנים מצווה חיובית היא לקום ולעלות ארץ ישראל ולדור בתוכה. It's obvious, says Rabbi Yosef, that there's a mitzvah to get up and go to Eretz Israel. Can I now show you why it's important to know Hebrew? I'm not charging Rav Moshe Feinstein with not knowing Hebrew. I'm too smart to do that on camera. But here's what I'll tell you. All due respect to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Can you go back with me to source 13 and look at the Tosafot again? היה אומר רבנו חיים. רבנו חיים used to say, דע עכשיו, that nowadays, אינו מצווה לדור בארץ ישראל. You heard those words? אינו מצווה. Go to the next source, 14. Look 2 lines down. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein quotes Rabbeinu Chaim as saying, דאינה מצווה בזמן הזה. What? Is it de'eno? Or is it de'ena? What's the difference in eno and ena? Oh, say it. Eno is, who here knows Hebrew well? Eno is talking about who? It's about the person. But the person. Ena is talking about who? Ena is feminine. Mitzvah. Mitzvah is masculine or feminine? The word mitzvah. Plural of mitzvah is mitzvot. Mitzvah is a feminine word. If it was not a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, then Rabbenu Chaim would have written Eina Mitzvah, like Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote. But instead he wrote Eino. Eino is referring to the masculine Eino. In which case the next word in the source 13 is not mitzvah. What's the next word? Mitzuveh. Thank you, Imam. It doesn't say Eina mitzvah anywhere in the Tosafot. It says Eino mitzuveh. He is not obligated. Not that there is no obligation. What's the difference? Rabbenu Chaim is saying, listen, it's hard to be in Israel. I'm in the middle of the France, Germany, I think crusades, I don't know what you think about. Like, it's hard to get to Israel. There are reasons not to go. If you can do it, of course you get a mitzvah. He's not telling you that there's no mitzvah. He's telling you don't have an obligation for the mitzvah of living in Israel. Every mitzvah has a reward. And pros and cons. Can I fulfill the mitzvah? Can I not? Do you sleep in a sukkah? Yes. What if, do you eat in a sukkah? Yes. What if the sukkah, you're afraid of the sukkah? There's something, the whole, you mitzvah, it's raining. Raining, you have to send the sukkah? No, why? Because rabbis made a rule that if you suffer too much, you don't have to fulfill that particular mitzvah. There are conditions to mitzvot. Rabbenu Chaim is adding this. Now you can ask what gave him the right to add this, but he's telling you there are times which a person says, yes, of course there is a mitzvah, but in my line of priorities, this one is not burning the most, whether you agree with him or not. But to then go ahead and to learn from there is no active mitzvah, it's a passive mitzvah, only if you're in Israel, you leave Israel. All of that, with all due respect, is based off of an incorrect grammatical reading of what was written in the Tosafot. You can only make such an error when Hebrew is not your language. See, Ashkenazim pronounce the word Eino and Eina. How do they pronounce those words? I'm saying A on purpose. We don't say A. Yeah. I'm saying, why am I saying? We say Eno and Ena.
And Eina.
You heard? For the Ashkenazim, the Hey is O. It's almost the same word. It's almost the same word. I don't expect for somebody who Yiddish is their primary language, who Hebrew grammar is not their forte, who the pronunciation leads to a misunderstanding. But now, you have entire groups of Jews that base themselves off of a law or a legal dispensation that doesn't even exist. And then now what? What do you do then? That's a terrifying thing. And when did it happen? When Moshe Feinstein passed away in your lifetime. This is not something that happened centuries ago, got deeply ingrained into the Jewish consciousness. This is something fairly recent. Now, source 16.
Das Torah, and you just have to accept whatever is said must be said with Ruach HaKodesh. And
Do you remember we had a shiur here? You weren't here because it's Shabbat shiur. We spoke about Emei Palier, Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, and the moment when the Catholic Church, Pope Pius, he passed the law on everyone must believe in the infallibility of the Pope. And the Catholic priests who couldn't get behind that law got in major trouble, excommunication from the church, if not worse. In contemporary Orthodoxy in Judaism, there is infallibility of the Pope. And that causes for tremendous mistakes because you don't fact check the facts. Why? Because the facts are true. Why would I fact check a fact? And that doesn't only apply to Judaism. I'm sure you're familiar that applies with. What does Rabbenu Avraham tell us? In the beginning of his essay in the Talmud, Rabbenu Avraham tells us, Vida, you have to know a basic rule. Rabbi Yitzhak Berdugo translated that in his white book, Understanding Chazal. You must know, and I'm paraphrasing, that it is forbidden for a person to say, accept my claim on the basis of authority. It is against the Torah, and it is against logic. They must prove themselves to you, both through the Torah and through human logic. To just accept that something is true because someone great said it is a crime against Judaism. That's Rabbenu Abraham opens up his part of where he goes with that is, therefore, when you see statements by our rabbis that cannot possibly sit well with us, you have to seriously ask yourself the question, and I believe in these things, and that led to a whole different argument, by the way. There are those Ashkenazi rabbis in particular who believe that this essay, therefore, was not written by Rabbeinu Avraham ben HaRambam. Because how could he say something so heretical? It's very simple, my friends. He is the son of the Rambam. What do you mean? Well, I guess I'm so heretical. You clearly don't know where he learned his Torah from. We
Someone who really has like kind of willing to the knowledge of it. You can see that there's a twisting of logical that makes something that doesn't make sense.
What happens when your entire study of Torah, put Rabbi Moshe Feinstein on the side, your entire study of Torah has always been on priding yourself on your ability to twist texts? It's an entire yeshiva methodology that everyone studies in today. Even the Sfaradim today. Everything is, it's not what you really think it means. Everything. Everything. Very good. But when you deny the human capacity to think long enough, so people no longer know how to tell between right and wrong, between permissible and forbidden. This pilpul method has in it much more sinister motives. I don't mean to disparage an entire category of Torah studied by certain rabbis, but there's a reason why our rabbis were so adamant never to teach such things. There was a rabbi in Morocco, Rabbi Yitzchak Sbag. Later becomes Sibag, Sebag, Sabag, the same, Rabbi Yitzchak Sbag. He was the rabbi of Rabbi Shalom Mesas. He was he wrote a book called Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Yitzchak. And they say the reason it's called Pachad Yitzchak because he was terrified. Like, when he came to yeshiva, he was a really tough personality. Rabbi Shalom Mesas said he remembers that a famous Ashkenazi rabbi once came to Morocco. And as was common, the Sephardic rabbis had said, please, why don't you come teach a shiur in the yeshiva, in the Beit Knesset? And he came to the yeshiva of Yitzchak Sbag. And you're talking, which caliber of students? Rabbi Shalom Mesas caliber, like chief rabbi of Morocco, later chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, not little yeshiva students, serious scholars. And he comes and he teaches this scholarly, pilpulistic insight. Says Rabbi Shalom Mesas, a few minutes into the shiur, Rabbi Yitzchak Sbag banged that thing. He said, bang on the table. He got up and screamed something very loud. And he said, did you come here to teach Torah? You came here to ruin the minds of my students. And he threw him out of the Beit HaMidrash. There is no room here for that kind of study because it is not Torah. It is the corruption of one's mind. You look at all of the writings of Chachmei Sfarad. The Sechel HaYashar, the straightforward mind that God gives a person only once in their life. Once it gets ruined, you can realign your tires, but not your brain. Once you teach yourself to think in a perverse fashion, there are certain criminals you can't fix. They're simply, their brain is so wired incorrectly that there's nothing that can be done. A serial killer, a pedophile, but there's nothing you could do. It doesn't matter. The brain is so corrupt. In Judaism, we're worried about the same thing. That's why our Chachamim were so particular, not just to study Torah, but how you study Torah. With who do you study Torah? From where do you get your information? What's the methodology that you have? I'm going to skip, perhaps, to the last source. One day. Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, whose Askara was today, his Yortzeit was today, was the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel. He was supposed to sign my rabbinic ordination. When I came to Israel, there used to be room for him on our smicha certificate. But he got hospitalized when that year, the first year that I was in Israel. It was a year in and out of hospital. And he never got well enough to sign our diplomas. And ultimately, he passed away, and they reissued us smicha certificates without his name on it. But Visoncino, he learned by Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. Mordechai Eliyahu, he wrote a tefillah for soldiers to say before they go to war. And if you hear his prayer, I think you very much know where he stands on the mitzvah of living in Israel and where that prayer will end. And I have in mind that we should say this prayer for all of our brothers and sisters who are going to war now. Mama, it's morning in Israel. They're already dressed and ready to go out again to the battlefield. The beginning is a Kabbalistic tefillah. L'shem yichud k'shay b'chush chutei, b'tchilu uchim uchim b'tchilu yachad Hashem yod ke bevav ke b'chud Hashem shem kol Yisrael. A combination of God's name and doing this mitzvah on behalf of all of the Jewish people. It's very important to the Mekubalim that when you do mitzvot, you don't do selfish mitzvot. You do mitzvot for everybody. You include as many people as you can inside of your doing a mitzvah. Harini mukhan lekayem mitzvat aseh min haTorah. I am preparing myself to fulfill a biblical Torah obligation. Lichbosh et haaretz, to conquer the land of Israel. V'leshev ba, and to live in it. Kemo shekatuv b'Torah, like it says in the Torah, v'yirashtem ota, v'yishavtem ba. You should conquer it and you shall live in it. U'mitzvat ahavat Yisrael, and as an Israeli soldier, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of loving my fellow Jew. How much more can you love a person than be willing to give up your life for them? Kemo shekatuv, like it says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai. You must love your fellow like yourself. I am God. And the third biblical commandment, one fulfills when serving in the Israeli military. U'mitzvah lehagen u'lehatzil Yehudim. And I'm fulfilling the mitzvah to protect and save Jewish people. Kemo shneimar, like it says in the Torah, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani Adonai. Do not stand idly by over the blood of your brother. I am God. Kedei, why do I do all of this? La'asot nachat ruach liyotzrenu v'la'asot ratzon boreinu. To give, to please my Creator, and to fulfill the will of He who made me. And it's a very very short tefillah. It's a very powerful tefillah. When you look at our soldiers and you say, what are they doing right now? They're not just conquering the land of Israel, they're just making sure we live in the land of Israel. They are the embodiment of the mitzvah v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. They exist so we can exist. We have been, recently one man said, world history has shown that no one saves the Jews except for Jews. You cannot trust any nation in the world to save Am Yisrael. They never have and they never will. The only people who consistently save Jewish people are Jewish people. We cannot put our fate in anyone else's hands. It's impossible. It's a death wish for the Jewish people. They fulfill the mitzvah v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and they fulfill the mitzvah of protecting the Jewish people with their own bodies, with their own souls. In Yom HaZikaron, they always say that in their death, these soldiers commanded us to live. And people who've paid the ultimate sacrifice of losing a brother, a sister, a father, a mother, a child, a spouse. As much pain as there in that, I think all of them could agree that being the father, brother, sister, child of someone who died in the Holocaust was much harder. Forgive me for my heretical words now. Because I don't know why they died. I cannot tell you for what purpose 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. I have no answer to that question. After 120 years, we'll sit with the Creator of the universe and we'll ask. When an Israeli soldier dies to make sure that you and I can live, to make sure that hostages come home, to make sure that our borders are safe and that our children can live and not die because they're Jewish, then I know exactly why people give up their life. It's very clear. It's not fair. It's not happy, but there's purpose in it. And just like there's purpose in that, there's purpose in living. And to this effect, all of the halachot that we're studying, these laws of war, it's what I said in the first shiur that we ever taught here. Jews don't go to war like other people go to war. We don't go to war to spill blood, and we don't go to war because we want to show the world how strong we are. We go to war as servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as ambassadors of God in this world. What should people do when they're faced with evil? All eyes are on us. They say all eyes on Rafa. I don't know. All eyes on us. When this war broke out, the U.S. sent warships to the Mediterranean Sea, just like they did yesterday, 2 days ago. England did the same thing. The whole world is watching, not watching because they're watching because they need to figure out for themselves what's in their backyard next. What do civilized people, what do people who represent God in this world, what do they do when they're confronted with the worst of all evils? And whether we, the Jewish people, realize it or not, we're setting that trend. The opposition doesn't matter, but the eyes are watching us. What do God's people do when they face the darkest of dark in the world? Because Hashem, I bless our soldiers that they should not just go in peace and come back in peace. They should merit to make a Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify Kadosh Baruch Hu's name in the world, and to keep us all safe.